Hello and welcome to this episode of Sabbath Worship with Ben. Hope you all enjoy it, and as usual, have a lesson and a presentation. Hope you all will have a blessed Sabbath. The title of this week's lesson is Come See. So this week's lesson is based on the story of when Jesus had just begun his ministry. He was recruiting the disciples. These were the original disciples who would become the 12 disciples later, as we now call them. So, he already called Peter and his brother Andrew, as well as James and John, I believe. So Andrew went off to find Nathaniel, who was his relative, so found Nathaniel sitting under a fig tree. And he told him that the Messiah had come from Nazareth. And back then, Nazareth had a bad reputation, kind of like a town nowadays where it wasn't infested by gangs, but it was, on the other hand, a place where people did things that Jews didn't really approve of. But Andrew encouraged Nathaniel to come and see Jesus for himself. So when he came, Jesus exclaimed that this man was truly a righteous man in Israel, because Nathaniel is presumed tried to follow the laws. It was commanded for Jesus to say such a thing. So Nathaniel asked how Jesus could know him, as he'd never met him before. But Jesus told him that when he was under the fig tree, before Philip called him, he saw him. Jesus knew this because of his powers as the Son of God. Or rather, that God told him, not his powers as the Son of God, God told him. And the Son of God, he worked to, as well as his work was to come and show the people he was Son of God. This was showing Philip that he was who he said he was. Philip was amazed and exclaimed that this truly was a king of Israel. And Jesus said that if he was convinced by such a thing, that would do even greater things in the name of God. So this whole story is a reminder for us that two things: that one, Jesus is the Son of God, as we saw when Jesus was able to tell Nathaniel where he was without seeing, or Nathaniel even asking, without going and seeing Nathaniel. And two, it reminds us that it's important to trust God and to not discriminate against who he chooses for his work. God has a plan for all of us. If that includes ministry, he'll be the first to tell us, obviously. So it's important for us to remember that no matter who God has called, it's not our place to judge others based on their surroundings or their character. Well, within their surroundings or their actions, but judge them based on their character. Besides, God asks us not to judge people at all, because he'll do that in the last days. So remember to accept people who they are, and we realize that God has chosen them. It's not discriminate against anyone. That's the lesson for this week. Hope you enjoy. I'm going to do my presentation. This presentation is going to be based off of Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 6. This passage of scripture is talking about how in the story, Isaiah is talking about how Jesus will come again. And he starts by talking about how God has sent him to work for the poor, to deliver those in need, and to heal the blind, to raise the sick. He goes on, verses 1 and 2, about all that he was to do. So it's a prophecy really about Jesus, and talks about it in the New Testament. But the prophecy is what Jesus read in the synagogue when he visited his hometown. So this is one of the ways we know that some of these things that seem to be talking about others and or the authors themselves. And the Old Testament is a prophecy because you can see that they were referring to things that happened in Jesus' life. For example, in Psalms, when David talks about how surrounded him and he pierced his hands and feet like Jesus was on the cross. He says that they divide my clothing among themselves and they cast lots for my vesture. All of that happened at Jesus' crucifixion. And then another psalm talks about how he wasn't pierced in his side. How he was pierced in his side as well, but his bones weren't broken. So all these things are prophecies of Jesus, so it's important for us to be aware of them, because it's a good example for us to use to witness to others about Jesus, that he truly was who he said he was. After the first 4 verses, talks about how finally our part in verse 5 and 6, how we're to be priests of God, we're to be his workers, and to carry on Jesus' work. So one of them, and the most important thing is two things: to be connected to God, and 2, to be a witness for Christ. So let's work on that this week. That's it for this episode of Sabbath Worship, and hope you all enjoyed it. See you next week. But until then, bye.